Hi and welcome back to my channel. My name is Sarah and today I'm back with a new reading vlog. I mentioned in my August reading wrap up that I've been struggling a little bit with my reading. I've really been struggling to concentrate on things and I still have been reading quite a lot, but I feel like I've not really been as engaged in my reading as I could be. And I think that one of the reasons for this is because I read a lot of quite serious books, I guess, and so when I get into a reading slump I then find it kind of difficult to pick things up because everything's quite heavy and requires quite a lot of concentration. So I have been thinking for a while that I would like to branch out on my reading, because I would say that if you've seen any of my videos, I basically mainly read classics or like literary fiction, translated fiction. I don't really read any genre fiction at all, and I have been thinking for a while that I would like to try some fantasy. I'm not really so interested in other types of genre fiction, so like romance for example, it just doesn't really appeal to me. Sci-fi, like hard sci-fi, I struggle with things sort of set in space with lots of science. It doesn't really again appeal to me. The same with like mysteries and thrillers. I find a lot of the characters in thrillers really unlikable, and I'm just like not particularly interested in any sort of mystery in a story, really. Like if that's the main focus, as soon as I find out the resolution to the mystery, I will instantly forget anything, like everything about the story. So like I have read some sort of crime books and thrillers in the past, and they just don't stick with me at all. I find them really forgettable, and I'm sure that that's not the same for every single crime or thriller book, but just for me personally, like if a mystery is the main element of a story, I'm just not particularly interested. And I guess with same with like middle grade YA, I'm sure there are some books out there that are really good. I'm just, I'm not a child, I'm not a young adult anymore, so I'm just not really that drawn to those sort of books. I find that the writing style is like not really for me, and I think that has in the past been my problem with fantasy as well, because I guess I read a lot of classics and more experimental fiction, and I'm used to a certain type of writing style, and I find that some of the fantasy books are very like straightforward writing, and I don't really like that. However, I see a lot of sort of fantasy booktubers, and it just sounds like they're having a really good time. They seem really immersed in everything they're reading, and I think it would be a good palate cleanser between more serious books to be able to really immerse yourself in like a new world with magic. It sounds like a good time. I have tried some fantasy books before and not really got on very well with them. I will talk later about some of the books that I've tried, but I just feel like there's got to be some fantasy books out there that are for me. And so in this video I'm going to try out 5 different books and see if I can find one that I really like. And this is a problem I have when I watch any videos on YouTube about fantasy books, because I don't have any books that I've really enjoyed, so I find it difficult to take recommendations from people because I don't know if their taste is going to match up with mine. So it'd be really good to find a couple of books that I really like, so that I could then find recommendations for similar books, and I just think it would be a really good addition to my reading, especially for when we're coming into autumn and winter. Like I think you could sort of sit down and just get really immersed in a whole new fantasy world. Some of the things that I don't particularly like, that in my head, fantasy books have a lot of, is fast-paced plots and just like very plot-focused books, which, I guess in fantasy quite often you have like a main resolution or a quest that the characters are going after. Like that can't really be the main focus for me, because I'm just not that interested in plot-focused books. Another thing that I don't really like is dragons, which like I'm sure if it's done well I could be interested in dragons. And yeah, I like my writing style to be a little bit more descriptive, not just really straightforward. I also, because I don't really read books with any romance in it, and a lot of fantasy books do tend to have romance, I struggle with that a little bit. It's not something that, like, I wouldn't not read a book because there's a romance element, but it needs to be written in a way that like I don't find too cringy. That's just personal taste. I've had a little think about books that I've heard people really rave about, and I thought I would start with some of them and try sort of a selection of books to see if there's anything that I connect with. So the first book, this one's not actually one that I've really heard people rave about, but it was available on my Libby app to read straight away, so I've already started it. And that's The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. I've heard people say that this is a little bit of a letdown actually of a book by Leigh Bardugo, but she is a very well loved author, and I've heard people say that her writing style is really beautiful, very descriptive, so I thought that might be a good place to start. This book, it's not set in a complete, like in a fantasy world, it's set in the real world with some magic, which I thought would be a good introduction because I don't need to like try and learn like a whole world system. And it's also a standalone book, so I don't need to commit to a series. I'm about 30% through this book so far, and I'm enjoying it. This is set in Madrid during the Spanish Inquisition, which I really like as a setting. I think that I've not really read anything set in that time period, but I really like Madrid as a city, and yeah, I find the Spanish Inquisition a really interesting time period. Our main character has Jewish roots, but she has converted to Christianity, and she is a scullion in a not so wealthy house. Like, she's one of the only servants, and one day the bread is burnt and she casts a little magic spell to make a new loaf of bread, or like to unburn the bread. And the mistress of the house finds out that she's cast this magic spell, and all of a sudden people are interested in her and they want her to compete in this competition, because the king is looking for a new sort of advisor with magical abilities to be able to help him expand his empire. So it's quite an interesting setup, and I am enjoying the writing so far. Like, it's not been cringy at all. It's quite descriptive, and I don't really know where it's going to go from there. I am a little bit concerned that there's going to be a romance element to it. It really seems to be building to that, so I'm not sure how that's going to go. I don't know why people have not liked this one as much as some of Leigh Bardugo's other books, but I am enjoying her writing so far, so if I get on okay with this one, I would be tempted to pick up some of her other books. So I'll keep you posted on that. The next one I think I could get on with really well is The Goblin Emperor. I can't remember the author's name. I saw Willow talk about this on her channel. She read it, I think, in August, and she reads a lot of like sci-fi and fantasy, but she said that this one was very like slow paced and sort of building more like political intrigue type one, without too much, like, there are no battles because I don't really like battles. There are no battles. It's more set in this sort of palace, and it's all about politics and power. So I think I could get on really well with this one. And then so Emily Fox talk about books that she would recommend for beginners to fantasy, and this was on the list, so I was like, great. And that was one of the things that she talked about, is like that there's no like big magic system. It's not like really a whole new world where you need to learn all the rules. So I thought that, yeah, I think I could get on well with this one. Another one that's available on Libby that I heard Carey over at Carey Can Read talk about. Again, she reads a lot, like very different books from me. She reads a lot of fantasy, and that's Gideon the Ninth by Tasmyn Muir. She said that this book was hilarious, and I I don't really read any funny books, so I have no idea how this one is going to go at all. I think that this one sounds quite different. It sounds kind of like quirky, a little bit less serious, so that could be interesting. And this is the first book in a series, so if I do like it, I could continue on. Then I've ordered Kushiel's Dart by Jacqueline Carey. I heard Chris over at Chris's Bookish Cauldron. I don't think he still runs his channel, but years ago he read this series and really liked it, and he said the writing was really good in it. This is another one which I think could be a slow burn. It's sort of a political fantasy, and there are like sex robots in it, which doesn't sound really my thing, to be honest, but I this is the first book in a series, and I think if I do like it, then great, I can also carry on the series. And then the last book that I'm going to read is Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillier. Jean from Jean's Bookish Thoughts read this book years ago and like absolutely loved the series, and I think it's like one of her favourite fantasy series, and this is sort of like a fairy type story, which again I'm like, oh, I don't know how that's going to go, but I think Mercedes also read this and really enjoyed it, and she does tend to, like, when she talks about her fantasy taste, she does like more like slow burn books with nice writing, so I'm really hopeful for that one. So yeah, in my order of like how I think I'm going to go on with them, I'd say probably the Goblin Emperor top, followed by Kushiel's Dart, then the Familiar, and maybe Daughter of the Forest. And I think like Gideon the Ninth is a bit of a wild card. Like I'm not sure how I'm going to go on with like a funny, quirky fantasy book. But I will keep you posted as I go. I'm really, really hoping I can find at least one book that I like in this video. It made me very happy if I could expand into fantasy. So yes, I'll keep you posted. Hello. It actually looks like it's the middle of the night with this lighting, but I promise it is not. It's just very, very dark outside. I have finished The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo, and yeah, I have some thoughts. I think when I last updated you, I was about 30% of the way through, and I said I was enjoying it. I was enjoying the writing, I was enjoying the setting. Yeah, I started to like it sort of less as the story progressed. I think for a couple of reasons. It got very plot focused, which makes sense. It is like a standalone sort of fantasy romance book, so it has to have quite a heavy plot, I guess. I didn't feel like the plot was doing anything particularly special. It was quite predictable at points. And I don't know, any of the twists I wasn't like particularly excited by. I also did not particularly care for the romance aspect of it. I wasn't convinced by the romance in it. Like, I didn't think it was particularly well developed. All of a sudden, these two people just like were completely in love with each other, but why? Not really sure. You didn't really get like much chance for the relationship to develop throughout. And I think also I'm not used to reading any sort of romance really in books, so yeah, like I just found it a little bit cringy. It wasn't too bad, but yeah, just like some of the things they were saying to each other, I was just like, oh. The other key issue I had with this book is that our main character in it has magical abilities, but it's not really like set out what those abilities include. So when the plot starts to progress, she starts doing spells that like seem maybe that they were beyond her abilities, but at no point is it ever discussed. So like for example, at one point in the plot, she manages to get herself out of some situation that she shouldn't really have been able to get herself out of by using magic. But you know, because there were no limits to her magic, it's like that goes. But it didn't seem like she was that powerful that she should have been able to do that. I think if you're going to make a magical book, you need to make it very clear what the abilities of the person are at the start. And yeah, sure, of course, like their learnings, they can develop stronger powers, but yeah, it just wasn't really made very clear. So I thought that was a very convenient plot point. So overall, I think that I would read more from Leigh Bardugo because I've heard that this is not her best work, and I did really enjoy her setting. I did like her writing. It was a little bit telling you things instead of showing you things, so you heard a lot of like inner monologue from different characters. There was no ambiguity as to what people were thinking. It was very much spelled out to you, which I didn't really particularly enjoy. But I think that she created a very interesting atmosphere, and I've heard better things about some of her other books, so I think I would try her again as an author. I think I would try Ninth House and see how I got on with that one. But yeah, definitely not a new favourite book. However, not terrible. I had a fun time reading it, and that is one of the things that I am looking to get out of fantasy, so I can take that off. But and the plot did make sense for the most part, which was good. Like I wasn't confused at why things were happening. It was logical. I just wasn't that invested, essentially. And so then yesterday I picked up The Goblin Emperor by Katherine Addison, and I'm about 95 pages into this, and I'm really, really enjoying this. Like I think, I don't want to speak too soon, but I think this could be the one. So at the start of this book, we have our main character Maya, who basically on the first page finds out that his dad, who is the Emperor, has died, along with his 3 elder half-brothers who were next in line to the throne in an airship crash. And so all of a sudden Maya, who has sort of been exiled because the Emperor didn't like his mother and his mother died, is now the new Emperor, essentially. And so he leaves the place where he's been living with his cousin, who he really doesn't get on with very well, and they go to the capital to sort of set up in the Emperor's palace. This seems like it's going to be very slow paced so far. Yeah, as I say, I've read almost 100 pages, and all that's happened is he's sort of gone to the palace and he's learning the court etiquette. He has no idea what anything means, and he's got these advisors that are trying to help him work things out. The writing in this book seems very believable, like it's not cringy at all. It's very slow paced, and we're getting good descriptions of things. It seems quite complicated. There are a lot of different factions. I think it's going to be quite political. Because Maya knows nothing about this, we're sort of learning about it at the same time as him. So it's quite a good way to introduce you to new concepts. It's not really like just laying out like, and this means this and this means this. It's like we're discovering things at the same time as him. So I'm going to continue reading this one. It's about 500 pages, but I'm really hopeful that this could be one that I really love. I think that there is a second book out in this series now. It doesn't actually say in this, but I'm sure when I was looking it up, there is a second book at least. So yeah, I will keep posted. Hello, it's now quite a few days later. I have been very bad at updating, mainly because I started reading The Goblin Emperor and I just got really sucked in by it and I just couldn't put it down. So I have now finished it and I really enjoyed this one. I think this is like a 5-star read for me, and it's a fantasy book. I can't believe it, but I would preface that by saying that this is not like a high action fantasy book. It's very much more political fantasy where, as I said at the start, you have a new emperor and he comes back from exile to his father's palace, and he's basically spends the whole book just trying to work out how things work, what's going on, what type of emperor he wants to be. There's sort of, I wouldn't say mystery, but there's an element where he's trying to figure out why his father has died, and he's also trying to work out who likes him, who doesn't like him, and their reasons for that, because he's been very much out of the loop of what's been going on at the palace, at court, for his whole life. And so he's trying to work out who's got allegiances with who, essentially. I really like the writing style in this. It was, it wasn't over the top descriptive or anything, and it was very readable, but it wrote really well. There were no bits where I was sort of cringing at it, which is good for me, because that is one of the issues I tend to have with fantasy. I just find the dialogue a bit unbelievable. I thought that was all really good in this, and I think for me why I really loved this book was just how slow paced it was. Like, it's really taking its time to introduce you to all of the different characters, to introduce you to the world, and I still don't feel like I have a good grasp of the world, but I think that's to come in future books, because our main character doesn't also have a very good grasp of the world, so we're sort of discovering with him what's going on. But yeah, I think this won't be for a lot of people because there's no real action in it. It's a very slow burn, and yeah, he doesn't really leave the palace at all for the whole thing. So yeah, if you like sort of more political intrigue type fantasy, I would definitely recommend picking this up. Or if you just like sort of slow political books, I would recommend picking this up, because the fantasy element, I wouldn't say it's secondary because it is a whole new world and we have elves and goblins, but they're not really doing anything very magical in this so far. It's more about sort of working out their customs and their court system. I think there are 4 books in this series. I looked on Goodreads and they all do seem to get quite good reviews. So this one is getting just over 4 stars, which is obviously a very good review, but as the series goes on, the reviews get better. I think that's fairly standard for a series, because you're only going to continue it if you enjoyed the first book, so you're sort of cutting out the chunk of people that didn't like this book. So yeah, like second, third and fourth books are getting like 4.1, 4.2 on Goodreads. So I think I would definitely continue with the series. So that's really great news. I can't believe I've actually found a fantasy book that I enjoy. I've read like a couple of chapters of Gideon the Ninth. So I'm going to continue with that next. I have it as an ebook from the library. I'll update you on that in a second. But the other thing I was going to say was, I think I'm going to have to change one of the books for this video because Kushiel's Dart has not even been dispatched yet from Waterstones. I don't really understand why it said it was in stock when I ordered it, but yeah, the Goblin Emperor arrived like over a week ago, and this one's not even been dispatched. So I don't think it's going to arrive in time for this video. So I have a couple of options, but it depends what comes in from the library, because I've put both The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, which is obviously a very classic sort of sci-fi fantasy book. I've put a hold on it. And I've also put a hold on Fragile Animals by Genevieve Jagger. This is a sort of vampire book, I think. I don't know very much about it. I think it's set in Scotland. I actually got the audiobook from the library, and I listened to like 20 seconds of it, and I was like, nope, I'm going to have to return this, because I really did not like the narrator's accent. She was Scottish, but it was like a very, like, if you've seen Baby Reindeer, it was like the woman from that accent, and I was just like, no, I can't do that. It's just like almost sounds like a comedy accent, so I just can't do it. I'm going to try, if the hold comes in, I'm going to try it on ebook. So those are my options. It's annoying. I was looking forward to Kushiel's Dart, but I'll read it in the future. Back to Gideon the Ninth. I've not read very much of this, but I am not getting the best feelings from it so far, just because of the writing style, I think. So this is like meant to be quite a humorous book, but I do not care for the humour in it so far, and maybe that will change. There's an awful lot of sort of like tongue-in-cheek banter in it, but I just don't find it particularly funny. So like Gideon keeps saying like, go eat a dick, stuff like that. I'm just like, I just don't, like, it's not that I find it offensive, I just don't find it funny. So there's like an awful lot of that throughout it. Like she keeps describing things as a bag of ass. I'm just like, that's weird description. Don't like it. We'll see how it goes as I progress through it. But yeah, so far I don't really know too much of what's going on. It's quite a confusing start to a book. So Gideon is a sort of serf that's bound to this house, House of the Ninth. The Ninth house seems to be the worst house in this world, so there are 9 houses. I think the first house being the most powerful, all the way down to the 9th, and it seems like a lot of the people that live in the 9th house are actually dead. They're all sort of skeletons. The leader of this house is a girl called Harrowhark. Technically her parents are the rulers, but they died, and she's like put some sort of spell on them so that they've like, their bodies haven't decayed, but they like can't really do anything, they can't really speak or anything. So yeah, she's basically in charge, and her and Gideon seem to really hate each other. Gideon's trying to escape at the start of the book, and then Harrowhark comes and sort of foils her plan. So that's as far as I've got, really. I can't really comment too much on the world building so far, because yeah, you've sort of been thrown in at the deep end with it. But yeah, I'm like really not liking the writing style, so we'll see how I go with that one. It's also quite long. Like, I don't know how long it is in a physical book, but the ebook I'm reading is saying it's like 568 pages. I'm like, oh, that's very long. So yeah, I'm gonna see how I get on. But I might DNF it if I get to like the 150 page mark and I'm still really not enjoying it, then it might be time for it to go, because I don't have time to read a 560 page book that I'm not enjoying. So that's my update. Yeah, and in other news, I've not had the most eventful week, but we have booked a holiday for October, so I'm very happy about that, because we were like sort of holding off to see if the weather is going to get really good in Scotland this summer, and yeah, it's just been terrible. My car was like frosty last week, so I was like, that's it, the summer's over. So we're going to go to Italy for a week in October, so I'm really looking forward to that. This weekend has been quite uneventful. We went to the cinema yesterday to see Firebrand, which is a historical fiction film about Catherine Parr. It was getting not great reviews because people were saying it was like not historically accurate, but that doesn't really bother me so much. I think especially if you've seen this film, it is like the ending is something that like obviously didn't happen, so the whole thing is sort of just it's more of like a thought experiment of like, what if this happened? So I really enjoyed it actually. I don't really watch very much of that sort of thing, and yeah, I thought it was very compelling. And Jude Law as Henry VIII, like he was so disgusting. I was not enjoying, but yeah, I don't really have any more plans for this weekend, so I'm really hoping I get some more reading done today. And then yeah, I'll keep you updated. Hello. Okay, so small update. This is later in the same day, and I've decided to DNF Gideon the Ninth. I just really was not enjoying this at all. And I got to like page 90, and it sort of got into the plot a bit more, and I was just like, I'm not invested in this. And it's more the writing style than anything else. It was just too jokey for me, and I think that was just going to continue throughout, and I was just getting annoyed by it. I can 100% see why people would really like this. I think if you already like fantasy, it seems like quite fast-paced fantasy. It seems like quite a cool world where there are lots of different houses, and they're all going to meet for the first time in a long time, essentially. And Gideon's been invited to join as the ruler of the House of the Ninth's Cavalier, essentially. It seems quite fast-paced, which is not really my sort of thing. So like at the start, she's invited to train to do this job, and then the training is like 3 pages, and I feel like normally in books that training aspect can be drawn out for quite a long time, and it's like descriptive and nice. This is just very fast, and yeah, I just don't think it's a book for me, sadly, so I just decided to return it to the library. And fortunately at this exact moment my hold of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy came in, and so I've started that, and I think it's actually going to be a very quick read. I am 18% of the way through it, and so far I'm quite enjoying it. I think it's more really sci-fi than fantasy, to be. I mean, it's very, very famous. I'm sure a lot of people know what it's about, but it follows. Well, I'm not actually sure what the whole plot of it's going to be, but the first part of it's set on Earth, and we have this essentially alien who has got stranded on Earth, and he's taken the form of a human, and his friends think he's a little bit weird. He's like not quite done a very good job of making himself a human, and so he's very strange. He keeps like staring into the sky looking for flying saucers, and people are like, oh, what are you looking at? And he's like, oh, just flying saucers, ha ha ha. And they're like, oh, what a strange guy. But yeah, it seems quite sort of like Neil Gaiman-y in style. Obviously this is written before Neil Gaiman, but that sort of like jokey sci-fi, which I'm not sure if that really works for me. I've not read any of Neil Gaiman's work, but I have watched Angels and Demons, I think is what it's called. And I quite liked the first series of it. I was less fussed by the second series. So yeah, I'm not sure how this is going to go, but this is like a very beloved book, so I'm hopeful that I will really enjoy it. It would be really nice if I enjoyed a book that was really popular, because I know it's part of a series as well, so it'd be good to have other books to read. So yeah, I think I'll fly through it and I will update you shortly. I finished Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I didn't really like it. And I know that's like a very unpopular opinion, but I think this is just not a book for me. And I kind of should have realised that before I picked it up, because, well, for one, it's not really fantasy, it's sci-fi, and I have basically read no sci-fi, and I don't really like things set in space. I also, because I've read no sci-fi, and this book is now like 40 years old, it's sort of like a piss take of other sci-fi, but if I don't have that reference, then I don't really find it that funny. It's not really my sort of humour anyway. It's very fast paced, which is not really my sort of thing. And yeah, I think it turns out that I don't really like humorous fantasy or sci-fi. Maybe this is something that I could come back to after I've read more fantasy and sci-fi and get more out of, because I will get the references and get what it's taking the piss out of. But at the moment, it's not that I didn't get it, I just didn't find it particularly funny. So yeah, this one's very, very popular, and it's probably just not a book I should have really picked up, because yeah, it's not really my sort of thing. So yeah, I'm not going to talk about it too much because I just don't really think it is a book for me. But I'm so glad I read it. It's one of those books that's on all the best books lists, so it's good to have some context for what it's about. And I don't think the writing was bad or anything, and the story was quite enjoyable. It's just not really my sort of thing. Anyway, moving on from that, I have now started Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillier. I bought a copy of this off World Books, and it's a really vintagey looking copy. So this book was first written in 1999 and is part of the Seven Waters trilogy. I've read about 100 pages so far, and I'm really, really enjoying this actually. This is the one that I was just on paper is not really my sort of book, because I've not really read any Celtic mythology, and it doesn't really appeal to me. Like the forest people, the Fae, I don't know much about it, and I was never that interested in it. So this one, I was like, "Ooh, on paper, doesn't really sound like my sort of thing." But the people that I've heard really enjoying this, like Mercedes and Jean, feel like sort of slower paced fantasy, and this so far is definitely that. It's very descriptive. I'm really enjoying the writing style. And yeah, like it's very slow paced so far. We're really setting the scene, and I feel like I'm really invested in these characters already. And I know that bad things are going to happen to them, so I'm a bit like, ugh. But we're following our main character, Sora, who is the youngest of 7 children. She's the only daughter. She has 6 older brothers, and their father is Lord Column, and he's the lord of this sort of large estate that's in a forest. And the forest is sort of protected by these sort of magical spirits. Nothing too tangible at the start. It's just when people try and reach his estate, they get lost. Like the forest is confusing. And we get a really good introduction to all of the brothers. I think it's quite impressive how she manages to build like 6 different brother characters to the point that like understand who each one is, and they all seem very distinct. And Sora's got sort of healing abilities. She is really into her like herbs and plants, and she has like a little room where she makes all these potions and goes out into the village and heals people. Her elder brothers are now at the age where they're going out with their father to raid. There are Britons that have arrived in Ireland and have taken some of the sort of sacred sites, and that's really got the Celtic people's backs up. So her father and some of her elder brothers are sort of going out quite often and fighting the Britons. And at the point I'm at, they have captured a soldier and they're going to torture and kill him. And Sora's brother Finbar, who she has a sort of like telepathic connection with, wants to save this soldier and let him escape before they kill him. So that's where I'm at. As I say, I'm really enjoying this so far. I didn't read the back of this book, and then as I was like sitting reading it, Scott said to me, "Oh wow, it says there's an evil curse on the back." I was like, I have not got to the evil curse, and I did not know it was about an evil curse. So I think I've got an evil curse to come, which is unfortunate because I was quite enjoying just like the slow meandering pace. Obviously, yes, it is a fantasy book, so there is going to be some sort of narrative where something goes wrong and they need to try and fix it. So I've got an evil curse coming. But yeah, so far, I think that I have high expectations for this, having read the first 100 pages. Like, I think this could be my favourite, but we'll see. It's about 650 pages. It is like quite a, you can't really, I don't know if I can compare it to another, one second. Yeah, this is like a regular size book, so it's quite small. The pages are quite tiny, so I think I should make quite good progress with it. And while I'm here, I thought I would just talk you through some of the fantasy books that I have tried in the past and not really got on with, just to give you an idea of like the sort of things that I've read. If you can give me any recommendations for things that I might like based on the books that I have read and enjoyed so far in this video, which is basically just the Goblin Emperor. Last year or the year before, I read the Earthsea Quartet by Ursula K. Le Guin. I hadn't read any Ursula Le Guin before, and I picked this one up because I heard Jess over at Sunbeam's Jess talk about it, and she said that this was a good starting point if you don't really like fantasy, because it's like very sort of soft fantasy. Writing is nice and like nothing too crazy happens. It's not like a huge like quest narrative or anything like that. So I got like an edition of the 4 books in one, and I think that this is a children's book, basically. I liked it 2 out of the 4 of them, so I think I liked the second one and then the 4th one, but the first and the 3rd books I didn't really like. I think that these were too short for one, so like the whole 4 books was like 600 pages, so each book was about 150 pages. I don't really remember too much about it, but in the first book you're following this man who is a magician, and he basically the only one who's going to be able to like save the world type thing. It definitely is very like soft sort of like rural setting, and I would say that like the writing is quite nice in this, but yeah, it was just like there wasn't enough to like really get my teeth into it. I found they were like, yeah, really short, and I think because this was like sort of classic fantasy, I think it was written in the 70s or 80s, like other things that I've read, like Harry Potter, for example, has built on it and like fleshed it out. So it felt like a very basic fantasy story, where you have like a sort of wizard who's going to try and save the world, and he like encounters a couple of obstacles in his way. There was nothing much more to it than that. And yeah, I didn't think it was anything particularly special. I then heard lots of people talking about Vita Nostra by Sergey and Marina Devchenko, and so I tried it. I actually tried it twice. The first time I tried it on audiobook and I didn't really like the narrator, and then I sort of put it down. I didn't own it, and then I picked it up from the library maybe last year. So there's obviously something about it that made me want to pick it back up, because I think an audiobook I had started it like 3 years ago. This is like a magic school type book. So at the start we have our character Sasha, and she is on holiday with her mum, and she meets a strange man who tells her that she has to go out and swim every morning at like 5 a.m. and then when she does that, she starts throwing up all of these gold coins, and it's very strange. And it was a very interesting setup to the book. We then get to the point where she's accepted into this magical school, and she's sort of coming to terms with her abilities. And when she got to the school, that's where like I really thought that we were going to have a good time. And it sort of just went downhill for me at that point. It was like very, very focused on learning, and there was like sort of a romance element to it. It just all got like a bit boring. Like all of the things I want from like a boarding school setup, where it's like about them making friends and like all of the other stuff that they do outside of class, like none of that was there, because she'd sort of isolated herself from all the other people because she was like really focused on her studies, and it was like really, really difficult, like very grueling studies, to the point where it was, she like basically had no time to do anything else, and she was becoming a very like unpleasant person, which I get was the point of the book, but it just sort of lost me at that point. So yeah, I didn't fully love it either. I also read Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is definitely more like a literary fantasy, and I liked it, but I didn't fall in love with it the way that I feel like I heard some people really love it. I really like the start of this book. So you're with Piranesi, who is in a sort of expansive house, and it's all a bit weird. There are rooms that fill with water, there are like strange artifacts around, and they're sort of trying to figure out why they're there. I really liked the setup of this book and all of the description of the house, and like trying to work out at the start what was going on. I thought it was really cool. Towards the end, it sort of lost me because you go into more of like a mystery element, and I could sort of see what was going on from like quite early on, and then towards the end it was more like actiony, and it just sort of like, again, not, I did like it, but I was not like, it wasn't a perfect book for me either. Then a few years ago, I read Black Leopard, Red Wolf by Marlon James. I really like Marlon James's writing. I really, really enjoyed A Brief History of 7 Killings, which I read maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. And because of that, when I went into Black Leopard, Red Wolf, I knew what his writing style was like. He's not the most accessible writer, I wouldn't say. His writing is very dense, and it can be difficult to follow, and I found this with Black Leopard, Red Wolf. We're following Tracker, who is basically on this big quest, and we're sort of set in Africa. It's based on African mythology, which is a really cool setting for a book. We encounter various characters. There's like a witch, there's a wolf, there's leopard. I can't remember which one's which. It's a while since I've read this one, so like please ignore my plot summary of it. But at the end of the first book, I was like, maybe I would read the second book, but then it's like never really appealed to me to actually pick up the second book, which makes me think that I didn't really like it very much. I found that I spent my whole time trying to like work out what was going on, because there were like, again, quite a lot of action scenes. The way that Marlon James writes, it's not always very clear what's going on, so I spent a lot of brain power in this book, like trying to work out exactly what was going on, who was who, why it was all happening. And I feel like if I went to read the second one, I would have to go through that process all again, and I just am not sure I'm ready for that. I have heard that you can read the books in any order, so I think it's a trilogy now. I'm not sure if the third one's out, but that you could read the second one first and then read the first one, because I think the second one is just following a different character's backstory. so maybe I could just read the second one without rereading the first one. They are quite big books as well. I think the first one was like 650 pages. But yeah, again, it's not a book that I just came away being like, wow, that was great. And I'm sure there are others, but the last one that comes to mind at the moment is Titus Grown by Mervyn Peake. Which again, I read a few years ago. I really thought this book was going to be for me because the writing was like really beautiful and it was very slow paced. It's set in this castle. It's a castle that's basically not changed for hundreds of years. We follow all of the different servants in the castle, and there's a newborn baby, Titus Grown, is going to grow up to be king. There are people that live outside of the castle in sort of caves. There's like a very traditional type society, and there seems to be no real interaction between the people that live in the castle and these other people. The first book sort of seemed like all set up, which I like the idea of, but I found the pacing in this book to be very strange. Like, we follow what seems like a very small quest type thing where it's like literally someone's trying to break into the library, like one of the servants is trying to break into the library, which seems quite like a small thing, and we spend like 150 pages describing him trying to get into the library and like all of the different little things that he tries to do. And it just kind of like, again, it just lost me a little bit. It was just too descriptive, far too descriptive. And I didn't really get what like the point of the book was. I think that the second book would change that a lot, so I am tempted to pick up the second book. But yeah, my feeling after the first book was like that the writing was very impressive, but that like I didn't really understand like what the series was going to do, which I feel is the point of the first book in the series, right? Like, you need to at least have an idea of like what the point is, what the characters are going to try to achieve throughout the rest of the series. So a bit confused with that one. And yeah, those are like all of the sort of fantasy books that I can think of that I've read recently. I think I've either gone for more classic books or more like inventive books, which maybe is not the way to go when you're trying to get into the genre, because I thought classic books was the way to go. So like Titus Grown, I'm sure, was written in like the 30s or 40s. The Ursula Le Guin books were written in the 70s or 80s, so I thought that might have been a better way to go. But now I'm thinking maybe it's not, because I suppose you're sort of getting like the origins of what has been built on since, so maybe it's better to go with something more modern that's like really like that people really love, and see if I can get into it that way. Any recommendations I would love. Like, I've tried quite a few times with fantasy, and I am now really glad that I found the Goblin Emperor that I really loved, and hopefully I'm going to really enjoy the Juliet Marillier. That would be like excellent. But yeah, anything else that you can think of that I would like, please let me know. Hello, I've just finished Daughter of the Forest, so I thought I'd give you a quick update before I finish off this video. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book. It's so different from anything I would normally read. So yeah, I think I said before that there was like a curse placed in this family. 6 brothers are turned into swans essentially, and their sister is set this task to rescue them essentially. So that's sort of the main narrative of the book, but it's very slow moving, and we get a lot of descriptions of things. So I think if you're not into slow paced books, then I would avoid this one. It is more plot focused than anything I would normally read. Like, I do normally read things that are kind of plotless or like, I'd say that this is more neatly wrapped up than anything I would normally read, but I was definitely really invested in the characters, and I was quite happy with that, to be honest. So yeah, this is the first book in a trilogy. I don't like, you can see that it's setting up for a second book, but I'm not entirely sure like exactly what that's going to be about, if it's going to be focused on different characters from the family or what. But I think I'm going to order the second book like today, because this is probably the most fun I've had reading a book in a really long time. It's kind of made me not question the books I read, because I really enjoy the books that I normally read. Like, I do like more literary books, I do like more serious things, but I think it's nice to have a little bit of like fun in with the more serious stuff. And yeah, this, I just had a great time from beginning to end. I was so invested in the characters. There's like a romance in it. I was really invested in the romance as well. It wasn't too cringy. There were a couple of lines towards the end where I was like, oh, that's a little bit cringy, but it was nothing too bad. And yeah, I really enjoyed Juliet Marillier's writing, and I think she has written loads of books. This was her first novel, which is crazy to me because yeah, it was really well written, really well paced, and yeah, just a great time. So I'm very, very happy with this. Also today, Kushiel's Dart arrived in the post, and yeah, I'm definitely not going to be reading it for this video because it is so long. It is like over 800 pages. I did not realise that. I really don't like this cover of it, but yeah, I may take this book on holiday with me because I think it would be a good holiday read. I'm maybe going to start a bit before I go to see if I'm liking it because I don't want to take an 800-page book with me on holiday if I'm not going to end up liking it, so I might try a bit first. But yeah, I've had a really good time filming this. I'm definitely going to continue reading more fantasy and trying different types of fantasy to expand and really figure out what I like. But this has been, so far, a useful experiment. So I've discovered that I really like the Goblin Emperor, which was more political and like very slow paced. And I really liked the Juliet Marillier. The Leigh Bardugo was sort of in the middle for me, where like I thought it was quite good, but nothing special. I would read more of her books, but like it wasn't an amazing experience. Hitchhiker's Guide from the Galaxy I did not like, and I DNF'd Gideon the Ninth. So I think I've discovered that sort of like jokey, funny, satirical fantasy and sci-fi is not for me. But that's good. This is what this is all about. I would like to try some more sort of cozy fantasy. I know that that's like a genre that people really love. I've actually reserved Legends and Lattes from the library, so I'll see if that comes in. See how I got on with that one, because that would be another genre that I could try out. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any fantasy recommendations, please feel free to leave them in the comments, and I will see you again for another video.